Every January, I notice the same small dissonance. The year turns, the calendar changes, and yet nothing in my body seems to have received the memo. The days are still short. The light is thin and angled. The residue of the previous year, its fatigue, its unfinished conversations, its losses, has not obligingly packed itself away. And yet, all around me, there is an expectation that something decisive should now be possible. It's not usually stated outright. It arrives as a mood, a pressure in the air, a sense that this is the moment when things should finally become clear, that intention should settle, that direction should announce itself, as though the mere fact of having crossed a temporal threshold ought to reorganize a life. I felt this expectation myself, even in years when I knew better. Even in years when grief, illness, or exhaustion made the idea of a fresh start feel faintly absurd. There's something persuasive about January, something that invites us to believe, however briefly, that time itself might intervene on our behalf. When clarity doesn't arrive, the disappointment can be surprisingly sharp. We don't usually blame the calendar. We blame ourselves. We assume we failed to make a proper use of the moment, that we missed an opening others seems to have seized with ease. But what interests me is not the failure itself. It's the assumption beneath it. The assumption that clarity is something that January is meant to deliver, and that if it doesn't, the fault must lie with us. This assumption is so deeply woven into contemporary life that it rarely comes into focus. But once you begin to notice it, you see it everywhere. In resolution culture, in productivity rituals, in the quiet moral weight attached to having a plan. Clarity is treated not just as desirable, but as evidence of seriousness, of competence, even of worth. For many people, January does not bring clarity at all. It brings a heightened awareness of what remains unresolved, a reckoning with limits, physical, emotional, temporal, that have not been lifted by the turning of the year. Instead of orientation, it produces watchfulness, an inward scrutiny that can easily slide into self-reproach. This isn't an individual failing. It's a cultural misreading of how clarity actually comes into being. January has learned to sound like authority. It quietly suggests that clarity is both required and available, that if we were doing this correctly, we would already know what we want, where we're going, how this year is meant to unfold. And if we don't, if we feel tired, foggy, resistant, unmotivated, January offers a familiar explanation. You didn't rest well enough. We didn't plan carefully enough. We didn't try hard enough. That logic is familiar. But familiarity isn't the same thing as truth. Pressure is often treated as clarifying, as something that sharpens focus and forces decisions. But pressure doesn't affect all systems the same way. For many people, pressure narrows perception rather than refining it. It compresses attention. It makes subtle distinctions harder to register. Under pressure, the system isn't asking what's true. It's asking what will make this stop. That's why the harder people push themselves to decide, the less they trust the decision. Why the more effort they apply, the noisier thinking becomes. Why consuming more advice often increases the distance from one's own internal reference points. These aren't signs of inadequacy. They're signs that clarity is being pursued under conditions that interfere with perception. This is where an important distinction helps. Action can be clarifying. Effort is not the same thing as action. Some people discover clarity through doing. They take a step, observe what happens, and adjust. When this works well, it usually involves light, reversible action, not high-stakes commitments. What produces clarity here is an effort. It's feedback. Effort, by contrast, is about pushing, overriding hesitation, compressing timelines. It's a blunt instrument. And blunt instruments are poorly suited to tasks that require nuance. Clarity depends on information, internal or external. And information requires access. People don't all arrive at clarity in the same way. Some are oriented outward. They learn by engaging with the world, by trying, adjusting, responding. Others are oriented inward. They rely more on coherence, on resonance, on bodily signals and values that reveal themselves over time. Neither orientation is better, but problems arise when people are required to operate in a sequence that doesn't suit their system. Many capable, ambitious people are inwardly oriented, but have learned to perform as outwardly oriented because that's what their environment rewards. They can do it for a while, often until exhaustion or burnout forces a reckoning. For inwardly oriented systems, pressure cuts off access to information. Decisions become heavy. Everything feels higher stakes than it needs to be. When a system is bracing, it can't listen. January also has a way of confusing anxiety with motivation. Anxiety is activating. It produces movement. It can look like drive. But anxiety-driven action is oriented towards relief, not understanding. You can accomplish a great deal this way. You can meet goals. What you usually can't do is feel settled, because anxiety narrows perceptions. It biases choices towards short-term relief. Movement is possible. Orientation is not. What January lacks isn't discipline, it's orientation. Orientation isn't planning. It isn't self-improvement. It's the process of understanding where you actually are before deciding where to go. Orientation asks different questions. What's present? What's constrained? What's asking for attention? When orientation is skipped, every decision feels heavier than it needs to be. Every choice carries an unnecessary fear of getting it wrong because it's being made without a reliable sense of position. Orientation doesn't eliminate difficulty, but it reduces distortion. January isn't especially conducive to clarity. Light is limited, energy is often low, many systems are still recovering. That doesn't make January a wasted month. It suggests it's better suited to noticing than declaring, to inventory rather than proclamation. For many people, clarity arrives after the pressure drops, not before. That's not a flaw. It's information. If clarity hasn't arrived for you yet, it doesn't mean you're late or behind or doing this wrong. It may simply mean your system requires a different sequence. You don't need to push your way into the year. You can begin by paying attention. January is lying to you about clarity. You don't need to argue with it. You can simply step out of its logic.